Hey guys, it's Vicky, and today I'm here to share with you all the books that I read in the month of August. I had a really good reading month in August in terms of like quantity. I feel like I read a lot, and I did read some good stuff. I did have one DNF that I will talk about, but yeah, let's just go ahead and dive into the wrap up. Okay, so the first book that I completed in August was one that I had started in July, and it carried over. And it is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I actually did a full standalone book review on this book, so I'm not going to talk about it much here because I feel like between the vlogs and the standalone book review, I have talked about this book enough on this channel, and yes, I'm done talking about it. So overall, I enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. I will link my standalone book review in the cards somewhere if you want to check it out. But yeah, I enjoyed this and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, in anticipation of the movie adaptation coming out, I read the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books. So I read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones, and these are by Alvin Schwartz and illustrated by Stephen Gamble. I loved these books as a kid, and so I was really excited about the adaptation. I actually did a video about that that I will also link if you want to check it out. But these are just basically short story collections of creepy stories to kind of tell at like sleepovers and stuff like that. At least that's what I used them for as a child. I loved, like, when I had friends over, we would read these to each other because it was fun to just kind of scare the crap out of each other. And yes, even being an adult, revisiting these books, I really, really enjoyed them. I definitely still found many of the stories to be super creepy. The illustrations are fantastic, which is, I think, what they're more kind of, this series of books is known for. The illustrations are just, like, amazing. I mean, yes, they are just so, so good. So I really, really enjoyed revisiting these. And I'm really glad that I read them all. I gave them all 5 stars because they're just so nostalgic for me, and I feel like they are really, they hold up over time, and they are a great introduction to the horror genre for kids. I know for me, this was one of the series that really got me into not only reading, but reading horror. And so I owe a lot to these books, and I love them. My favorite stories, I would say, I remember this one the most as a kid because I think that as a kid, this was the only one that I actually owned, was More Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. But I would have to say that they're all equally good though. And my favorite stories are, from this one for sure, there's a story in here called The Window that still just creeps me out. I don't know why, but it just gives me the creeps for sure. And then here in the first installment, they do a whole section on urban legends, and I love me a good urban legend. So like in here, you'll find the story about like the Hook, and what's the other one? The one about like the babysitter, and she's getting weird phone calls coming into the house, and it turns out the caller's inside the house. Like all those kinds of like fun urban stories are in this collection. So yeah, this is just a great, great book series, and I really love these, and I will definitely reread them again in the future. So yes, 5 stars for all 3 of these. Check them out if you have not. Next up, I did a buddy read with Bobby over at Bobby Reads Too Much, and we read The Ruins by Scott Smith. And this is a horror novel that takes place in Mexico. A couple of American students, college students, are there vacationing, and they decide one day to go to this like archaeological dig, and they stumble across something pretty bad. Pretty bad, and the story kind of goes from there. I enjoyed this, but I was a little bit surprised by what the evil thing is in this book because I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting something completely different. So when I realized what the evil thing was, and I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to spoil it for people. At first I was a little bit like underwhelmed, if I'm going to be honest, because the thing to me is just not something that I find scary. However, there were other elements that came into play that made the thing scary. Feelings of being trapped with no way out and that sort of thing, having to survive. All of those things kind of work together to just make for a pretty suspenseful horror novel. I enjoyed this, like I said. I don't know, there were definitely some parts that were definitely gory, that definitely like made me like not want to eat while reading. So there's some of that kind of stuff, like body horror type of stuff. And like I said, it's a lot about surviving. So things get pretty intense with the characters. Speaking of the characters, though, I didn't find the characters to be particularly memorable. They weren't, they just weren't the type of characters that are going to like stick with me. I will say, though, that the way this book ended took me by surprise pleasantly. I really enjoyed the ending because Bobby and I, when we were reading it together and talking about it, we kind of took guesses as to like, okay, who's gonna die first? Who's gonna survive? And we were totally wrong. And I actually am really glad that we were wrong because what we were expecting was kind of like the the typical sort of horror ending that you would expect, and we did not get that. So yeah, I loved the ending. It was dark. It was not a happy one for sure, but it was good. It was good. So I would say, though, I think I gave this book 3 stars, and I think the reason was because of the lack of kind of memorable characters, because to me, just because it's a horror novel doesn't mean that the characters have to just be like cardboard cutouts of people and just kind of there to be killed off or whatever. I like them to still have some depth, and I felt like these characters kind of didn't. And the pacing was a little bit off. Because like I said, there is some death in this book, as to be expected. And you're kind of waiting for people to start dying. And it took a really long time. So this is kind of a slow burn. But for me, it was like, we were quite a bit in. I want to say we were like 2/3 of the way in before that sort of thing happened. So it was like the pacing just felt kind of weird. And then, so the ending, though it was good, it felt kind of rushed to me. So I gave it a 3-star. I definitely would recommend this to horror lovers out there who haven't read it because it is an enjoyable one. I went ahead and watched the movie. I'm not going to do a flicks and lit on it just because, I don't know, I'm just not in the mood to. And honestly, I didn't think the movie was that good. I don't know. I just didn't feel like talking about it. But basically, like, they changed the ending of the movie to what the stereotypical ending, what like Bobby and I thought was going to happened in the movie, and it was like not as satisfying. So I would not recommend the movie, but the book for sure. Check it out if you haven't. It's good, and it's really a great summer read because they're in Mexico. It's hot, and they're kind of trapped. So they're dealing with the elements and everything, and the sun beating on them, and it's hot, and yeah, it's good. It's a good summer read. So definitely, if you haven't read this, put it aside for maybe next summer's TBR. Next, I did another buddy read with 2 lovely ladies, Stacy over at Stacy Stories and Joni over at Joni Reads. We buddy read The Tommyknockers by Stephen King, and I actually ended up listening to this on audio, the entire thing. It's narrated by Edward Herman. Yes, Edward Herman, who plays Richard Gilmore in The Gilmore Girls, Lorelai's dad. Loved it. I loved his narration. Not what I would have expected out of him to do a book like this, but it was really good. So yeah, I would recommend the audiobook just to get that out of the way. It was enjoyable. Long, but enjoyable. So this is a story about aliens. And, you know, a lot of people crap on this book and say that it's one of Stephen King's worst books. I think Stephen King himself has even said that this book has its problems and whatnot. But, you know, I really enjoyed it. And so did Stacy and Joni. We all really enjoyed it. Because, like I said, it is an alien story. And basically what it entails is there is this woman named Bobby who owns a chunk of property in Maine. She's walking her dog one day in the woods near her property. She stumbles across this little piece of metal kind of sticking out of the ground. And when she kind of starts to try to pull it up and figure out what it is, it's like not coming up. And she starts to dig it up and become kind of obsessed with digging up whatever this is. Well, it turns out it's an alien spaceship. And it starts to do things to Bobby. And as she unearths it, it starts to do things to the entire town of Haven. This is the town they live in, Haven. And things just kind of escalate from there. And like I said, I really enjoyed this. I thought that the take that Stephen King, his kind of take on the alien story, the alien takeover story, was done really well. And I know that a lot of people's problem with this book is that it is too long. And I tend to agree. There is a kind of chunk in the middle that I feel like not necessarily could have been completely taken out, but maybe just shortened a little bit. Because he kind of does the thing where he introduces you to all of these different characters that live in the town and kind of shows you what this alien spaceship is doing to all of them. And I feel like that is kind of necessary, and it is kind of building up to, like, oh my gosh, these things are like taking over this town, and what are they going to do? What's going to happen? Who's going to save the day? Like all that stuff. So I felt like it was necessary to have it in there. But maybe kind of it could have been pared down a little bit, just a little bit. My favorite character in here, oddly enough, was the kind of hero of the story, and his name was Jim Gardner, but he kind of goes by the name Guard. He's a very flawed man, has a lot of kind of demons that he's dealing with. He is an alcoholic. He's struggling with that. He's done some things in his past that are not good. And he's also kind of one of those people who's very anti-government. He's into like conspiracy theories. People think he's kind of nuts, but I found myself in many cases kind of tending to agree with him, which was, you know, interesting. There's a whole section in this book where he's at like a dinner party and he meets this guy who I think he was like he like owned a nuclear power plant or was like running a nuclear power plant, and he gets into this huge argument about nuclear power with him because this book, I should mention, came out in 1988. So this was like 2 years after the Chernobyl disaster over in the Soviet Union. And there's a lot of, you know, controversy, we could say, dealing with the way that Chernobyl was handled by the Soviet Union, the ways in which they didn't want to admit things that happened, the ways in which they didn't want to admit the severity of radiation poisoning, and what it would do long term to the people in the area. And he gets into this, so this character Gardner gets into this huge like kind of discussion argument with this guy, and they talk about Chernobyl, and I found it just so interesting because, like I said, obviously Stephen King was thinking about these things, and I tend to think that there was probably a part of this book that was hugely influenced by the Chernobyl disaster, because that's kind of what happens to the people in the town. They start to kind of have effects of radiation poisoning, and it's disgusting and it's disturbing. And what makes it even, I think, creepier is that it's real. Like, if you are subjected to a high amount of radiation, like, it does some nasty things to the human body. And he definitely plays with that in this book. And yeah, there were some pretty disturbing things happening to these people, and it's stuff that like could really happen. Stephen King wasn't making this up. Like, it was really vivid and realistic in the terms of the effects. Obviously, there's the questions out there. Do aliens exist? Would they attack us? What would that be like? Obviously, those things are kind of up in the air. But the radiation stuff, we know that that stuff happens, and we saw it and the effects of it in the Chernobyl disaster. So I just found that really interesting, especially because I just recently, twice now, have watched the Chernobyl miniseries on HBO because it was fantastic. And so I was just like really amped up when I got to that part in the book. And yeah, I think that the other thing this book had going for it was I thought it had a pretty solid ending. I know some people don't like the ending. I think that for a Stephen King ending, it was pretty dang good, because I know sometimes the man struggles with how to end his books. He carries on and on and on, and then you get to the end and you're like, well, what the heck was that? But I feel like in this book, he handled it really well. I think it was done well. There were a few things that I wish would have been maybe some questions that would have been answered a little more clearly, and a little bit more detail about the aftermath and what happened to some of the characters in more detail. But I think that it had kind of a bittersweet ending, because there was some stuff, but then there was this kind of sweet sort of thing that happened also. So it just worked for me, and I enjoyed it. So yeah. Once again, I am one of those people, and I said this before I even started this book, that I thought I was going to enjoy this because most Stephen King fans do not enjoy this book. I'm like, well, watch, I'm going to end up liking it. And I did. I really liked it, and I gave it 4 stars. So if you want to read a cool alien story, check out the Tommyknockers. Just go into it knowing that, yes, there are parts that are a little bit long-winded, that could have been edited down, but I think that overall it's a strong story. It's good. It's creepy. Yeah, it's cool. Check it out if you want to. All right, so then I read a very popular thriller right now. I read Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. So this is my 3rd Riley Sager. I have read Final Girls and The Last Time I Lied, and I enjoyed them. So I went into this one with somewhat high expectations because I enjoy his books, and secondly, a lot of people have been saying that this book is awesome. So I was like, all right, well, let's find out. And this book basically deals with a girl named Jules who is kind of going through a rough patch in life. And she stumbles across this ad to become an apartment sitter in this very iconic, beautiful apartment building in Manhattan. It overlooks Central Park. It's very iconic, and it also happens to be the setting for this book that she cherishes and loves and read growing up. And so she obviously jumps on the chance, and they hire her to be an apartment sitter. And she quickly learns, though, that there are definitely some kind of weird little quirks, little rules about living in this apartment building. You have to always be there every night. You can't leave the apartment overnight. You aren't allowed to have any visitors, and you're not supposed to really interact with the other tenants. So kind of weird, and Jules is kind of like, well, that's weird, but I mean, they're paying me a butt ton of money, so I'm just gonna kind of go with it. But she does sort of break the rules when she kind of becomes friends with one of the tenants, and then that tenant goes missing. So she kind of dives into what happened to this girl. Is there something, does it have something to do with the apartment complex? And as she discovers, there's been like this long history of weird happenings, and kind of a dark history surrounding this apartment complex. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a fun ride. It definitely, like, the first kind of little twist that happens towards the end, I saw coming from like a mile away. But the rest of it, the big final reveal, I had no clue, and I really enjoyed it. I don't know how realistic it is. I don't want to know, because if that were like a real thing, that would be really bad. So I hope that it's not grounded in reality, because yeah, wow, it was something. So yeah, I would say if you like thrillers and you haven't read this book yet, I feel like so many of you have already read this, definitely check it out, because I think, like I said, that it had a pretty interesting outcome, Definitely creepy, not what I was expecting. I really liked the main character, Jules. I thought that she was very relatable, very likable, which sometimes, especially when you read a lot of thrillers, the main character always has some sort of issue, like they're like, you know, not very nice people. But I feel like Jules was genuinely nice, and she was dealing with some difficult stuff and was just having a tough time. And yeah, I liked her. So that also kind of helped with my liking of this book. And yeah, I gave it 4 stars and would highly recommend it. Yeah, check it out if you have not. All right, so now let me get to my DNF really quick and just get it out of the way. I DNF'd Peace Like a River by Leif Anger. I went into this with high expectations, and I made it about 60 pages in and decided that it just is not for me. I think the writing is good. I would definitely maybe try to read another book by Leif Anger if I came across it, because it wasn't the writing I had a problem with. It was the story. I think I wasn't connecting with the story. And there was this kind of element to it that I wasn't expecting, that I wasn't on board with completely. I don't want to say what it is because I feel like it might be spoilery, but let's just say like there's like a touch of like, I don't even know what to call it, magical realism maybe? That, you know, reading the blurb, I just wasn't expecting that to be there. And it just kind of, I don't know, and it kind of took me out of the story when I was reading it, because there was a couple instances like that happened right in the first 50 pages where, yeah, I was like, what is this? Like, where is this going? So yeah, I decided that I'm gonna pass on this one. It just wasn't for me. I feel bad because so many people out there love this book, but it's just not my kind of book, I guess. So yeah. I DNF'd this, sorry. I don't know what else to say. And then I finished out the month by reading a sci-fi thriller, Recursion by Blake Crouch. Wow, this book was really cool. So I read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch a couple years ago and really enjoyed it. And I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it because it has some science-y bits. And the science-y bits for me just don't always go over well. But his combination of like the sci-fi stuff and like the thriller kind of mystery aspect really worked. And it also worked really well in this book. This book deals with memories. Specifically in this book, society is dealing with this phenomenon called false memory syndrome, where you will suddenly be sitting there and then you will have this very strong sense that you lived this completely separate life, where maybe like in the life you're living now, you're married and you have children, and then you have this feeling like you totally didn't do any of that and your life was completely different, and it's so realistic to you that it's like, it like messes with your brain. And people keep having this happen to them. And there's this detective who is kind of starting to try to dig in and figure out what's causing it, where does it originate from, what is it, you know, exactly. And then it also deals with a neuroscientist who is working on this technology to preserve memories, make you be able to relive a memory, and it all kind of ties together. And just like in Dark Matter, this book gets crazy. Like towards the end, it's like things are just happening and it's just like, it's like mind-bending. And like, again, I don't know how grounded in reality this is because I can't say that I completely understood the science aspects, but I enjoyed the ride. I will say that I totally enjoyed the ride. I thought that it was very well done. The pacing was fantastic. It was like boom, boom, boom. Like right from like the prologue on, it was just like going. I didn't feel bored at all. And it just takes you on a ride. It really does. So, yes, I would highly recommend this. I gave it 4 stars. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Looking forward to reading Blake Crouch's other work. I know I have Pines on my TBR that I will probably read next, and I will definitely be looking out for more of his books because, yeah, they just work for me. I listened to this one on audio as well, I should mention. I don't remember who the narrators are. There's a female and a male narrator. They did a great job. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, this book was awesome. Check it out if you haven't. All right, guys, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of August. I had a pretty good month, and I feel like page count wise, I got through a lot. Like, I feel very accomplished. So yeah, not a bad way to end the summer, that's for sure. So yeah, let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Also, let me know what you read in August, because I would love to hear what everybody's been reading. Yeah, so that's it. I hope you guys had a great month, and I hope that September also treats you well. And I will chat with you very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.